Good afternoon or good evening, depending on which part of the country you're joining us from today. Welcome to The Open Mind, a lecture and film series that brings together thought leaders at the intersection of science and culture for meaningful and relevant programs about mental health. The Open Mind is proudly sponsored by UCLA's Friends of the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior and the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Directors at UCLA. I'm Vicki Goodman, and it is my honor to welcome today's special guest, Dr. Drew Ramsey, psychiatrist, author of 5 best-selling books, and a leading voice in nutritional psychiatry and integrative mental health. Dr. Ramsey is here, joining us from Bermuda, no less, to talk about his new book, Healing the Modern Brain: 9 Tenants to Build Fitness and Revitalize Your Mind. In his groundbreaking book, Dr. Ramsey shines a much-needed light on 9 tenets that work together to promote neuroplasticity, facilitate neurogenesis, reduce inflammation, and foster a healthy microbiome, ultimately helping individuals protect their brains and safeguard their mental health from the challenges of today's world, which are many. We are also honored to have with us Dr. Arpana Church, Associate Professor and Co-Director of the Goodman-Luskin Microbiome Center at UCLA, who will join Dr. Ramsey in discussion. Dr. Church is also the Director of the Neuroimaging Core, Director of the Obesity, Metabolic Disorders, and Eating Behaviors Research Program in the Department of Medicine at UCLA, and the Director of the Manukian Division of Digestive Diseases at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. On behalf of the Friends of Semel and Resnick Board, I would like to thank both Dr. Ramsey and Dr. Church for taking the time from their busy schedules to educate us about the healing the modern brain. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. Today's program will run for approximately 1 hour, with the last segment reserved for your questions. If you would like to ask either of our guests a question, we ask that you please type it into the Q&A, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We have over 1,700 people registered for today's program, so we appreciate your patience. We'll try to get to as many questions in the time allotted. Today's program is being recorded. You can view it starting tomorrow on the Friends of Semel website, which is friendsofsemel.org, friendsofsemelinstitute.org. There you will find videos from past events, information about our Teen Advisory Council, our Research Scholar Program, and a calendar of upcoming programs, including the 5th Annual Open Mind Film Festival for high school students that will be held on Sunday, April 27th, in person at UCLA. Deadline for film submissions is rapidly approaching for all you high school students out there. It's March 27th. So this is a chance to showcase your talent. You can see our website again. It's friendsofsemelinstitute.org for more information. And now let's learn how to heal the modern brain. Please join me in giving a warm Zoom welcome to Dr. Drew Ramsey and Dr. Arpana Church. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vicki. Thank you so much for having us. I'm particularly excited because you talk about so many wonderful things, and oh my God, what a wonderful title. I just absolutely loved your book. It was so easy to read. And I know you have 4 other phenomenal books that you wrote before. Eat Complete, Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, The Happiness Diet, and 50 Shades of Kale. So I would love to ask you, Drew, first of all, what made you write this one? Like, how is it different from the other books?
Thank you for that question, Arpana. First, I just want to thank Wendy and Vicki and the Semel Institute. I want to thank everyone who's watching now, who's taken some time. This is kind of my first book event for this launch, and it's just so I'm going to try and not get too emotional, but I just first, it's very meaningful to have that many people interested in this idea and interested in my work and my writing. So thank you all. It's just a treat to be with you tonight, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with you at 9 p.m. Bermuda time. Please don't anyone worry about that. I've been looking forward to this all week. I think this book, it came from a number of different places, Arpana. I think one, it just came from my own experience, sort of transitioning from being a Manhattan psychiatrist to being a Manhattan psychiatrist who's living with his parents and his wife and kids in rural Indiana and commuting to New York, to being a Manhattan psychiatrist on telepsychiatry only during COVID, and then moving to Jackson, Wyoming, where we are now. And I think there are a lot of complicated pieces in there, obviously, but I had produced this as a course, as an e-course, trying to pick up on the themes that I learned from nutritional psychiatry. And what I've learned from nutritional psychiatry is that there's incredible opportunity, a lot of misinformation, and a lot of, in some ways, denial and kind of lack of integration of some basics that we know help with mental health. And a way that when you think about nutrition as a psychiatrist, you end up saying like lentils and pesto a lot, and wild salmon and anchovies and sardines and foods that other people sometimes aren't saying. And and they're not like quibbly, whiffly, waffly superfoods. Like, no, these should be on your table every week, just kind of obvious in the data. And so I just realized though, I'm a general psychiatrist. Like I treat whoever comes in, mostly mood disorders, but I have a lot of experience in the past working with patients with psychotic disorders, treat a lot of substance abuse. I do a lot of psychotherapy, and it felt like I was kind of being perceived as like all I did was prescribe lentils. And sometimes people would come to see me and they'd sort of say, like, I know this isn't going to happen, but I'm kind of hoping you can take away all these medicines and like figure out something in my diet. And and that's not really how I ever thought nutritional psychiatry would work. I mean, sometimes that can happen. I think probably celiac disease is the best example. Sometimes people can really upgrade their diet and clearly improve their mood and treat mental health disorders. But it felt more that there was this more active stance, that when I got more active with how I thought about myself as an eater, when I kind of stepped away from a lot of what I had in some ways been taught about food, but mostly, what I kind of thought about food, and paid more attention to the nutritional psychiatry data, it changed how I ate. And so I wondered about the other parts of my life and my patient's life that, everybody who's watching, who's a clinician or who's in therapy, it matters when your therapist says like, hey, you're not eating well, or hey, you're not moving your body, or let's talk about your sleep. There are these like, sort of tenants. And it felt to me also that we, for all of our progress as a country, in some ways, why there's been, I think, such a captivation by the Maha movement, our health has been declining. We're a wealthy country, we're a well-fed country. A lot of people I know have food insecurity and hunger, but we could be an incredibly well-fed country. We have lots of exercise machines everywhere. We all can have great sleep hygiene. So something's going on, and it felt like we needed to have a more preventative, active framework about caring for our mental health. When it comes to our physical health, we all know what to do for physical fitness. We might not run, we might not, stretch, work on our hip flexibility. I'm 50 now. That's all I think about, my hip flexibility. But we know what to do. And
I
with
mean,
mental
I
health, not
love
so
that.
much.
I love that. I know you talk about nine tenants, and I know food is a big was one of the big chapters in your book. But before we get into those nine tenants, I was really struck by the fact that you use the word mental fitness. I loved that. I mean, it was such a positive spin. And we talk about mental health, and you're a psychiatrist, and people talk about mental disease, mental disorders, and I loved how you talked about resilience and mental fitness. Can you talk more about that and where that came from, where you kind of spun it into this?
Well, there's a statistic in my slide deck. I put this up. 1 in 5 people every year struggle with a mental illness. And about the last decade, I've said this is my least favorite statistic. This is where stigma comes from. It's that, a few of you, 20% of you have mental illness right now, and the rest of us don't. And I didn't like that. That didn't fit with what I've experienced in terms of being a successful professional, but also having a lot of different challenges with my mental health. And it didn't really feel like it was anything anybody would want to take part in. Who wants mental illness? For all we do to fight stigma, my patients still hate going to the pharmacy. they hate going up to the pharmacist. Says, "Oh, you're still taking this?" Or, "Oh, does your doctor know you're on all of these?" Stigma's everywhere. And I just, it's, I've been doing this a while now. I've been a psychiatrist for, 20 plus years. And so I just felt like we needed to embrace what lack of stigma really would mean, which means that we all have got to work on it. And I think that's where the modern brain comes in.
Mhm.
That there is something that has shifted. It isn't just our diet that changed. And if we don't get proactive, your mental health is going to get damaged. If you don't get proactive today, you're going to end up doom scrolling. You're going to end up eating a diet of ultra processed foods. You're going to sleep 5.5, not 8 hours a night. And your connections are going to degrade in quality and quantity as you age. It's just the
And
data.
also, what I loved about your book was not only was it empowering because you provide these tools, but it also, as a physician, I'm sure they come to see you when they're not feeling great, when things are not going right. But I loved it because you kind of talk more about things that you could do to prevent illness. And that was really, I think, very empowering, and a lot of take-home messages that I actually got from your book. So that was, that.
I'm glad to hear that, Arpana. From I'm very glad to hear that it feels practical to you, and that it also. I really honor that there's a lot of mental illness out there, and I don't in any way want my books or any of my work to deny that. At the same time, I see a lot of us trying to make things like medications and psychotherapy work in the context of a headwind that is the modern Western lifestyle. And that's fine. I mean, people are going to live how they live, and we're going to do our best to take care of them. But I think probably another thing that hit me is I'm a parent now, and I just didn't like the idea that I'm supposed to like anxiously wait that like some of the very questionable genetics, no offense to my relatives, any of them, but just there's stuff in my family. Like I bet everybody listening, there's some stuff in your family. And so I just, it's like, besides pesto and lentils and wild salmon, like, what do I do for my children? Okay, should get them to play sports. Are there ones that are best for their mental health? I have this like sing-songy, sweet son who loves to sing and dance, loves musical theater. So if you look at the data on movement, some of the meta-analyses, they seem to suggest that like dancing is actually one of the best forms of movement for preventing depression. And so, it's just, it's kind of interesting. Where traditionally, I'd push him towards like a, more masculine sport. And so if you kind of, so I think that's another place, Arpana, when you're saying, where did it come from? And I appreciate you. I hope it's actionable. I mean, my fear always is that people will see this as, somehow trying to replace conventional psychiatry. And I'm very much in a lot of ways a somewhat conventional psychiatrist. I think I'm labeled as a very integrative guy, but if you sit down on my couch, I'm a kind of classic psychodynamic psychiatrist. And so, but yeah, this idea, I've heard myself as I've been doing podcasts talking about it, it's sort of the training and our attitude culturally is that you never want to meet somebody like me, psychiatrist. You don't, people, even a lot of my very secure, very like confident patients who are adults, like nobody in their family knows they're seeing me. I have like yoga in their calendar. And a lot of times you do meet people kind of, it's like, when do you come? It's like when you're at rock bottom. It's like that. I mean, I like a psychiatric crisis. I really, I'm trained in that way. I like to help people in that setting. I've got no problems. You have a crisis, no stigma about that. But boy, if I would have met you like 6 months ago, just think it's a lot less emotional pain. If I would have met you like a year ago, and not every collaboration is successful. Let's say we had a successful collaboration. If I meet you right now, you don't have symptoms. I've not really met a lot of people who don't have questions for me as a psychiatrist.
You in the book you talk about these 9 tenants, but you also base mental health and mood related to three main things: neuroplasticity, inflammation, and microbiome. And I kind of felt like you tied those three things to these 9 tenants. So before we kind of go into those 9 tenants, I wanted you to talk more about that so people can understand how everything is related and how that actually leads to more mental health.
Yeah, for sure. So everybody in Healing the Modern Brain, I've got a copy right here, and hopefully some of you are going to have a copy soon. And I hope to meet you wherever you are and sign your copy someday soon. Um, the book is it kind of goes over the mental health crisis a little bit. You know, some of those statistics, and the book is 58 million Americans are struggling with depression and anxiety. Just fact check that it's now 61. So, they're 1 in 4 women over the age of 60 is taking an SSRI antidepressant medication. And I really try to ask us all to approach that statistic, not with how we usually approach it, like horrible overprescribing, but to see, our matriarchs all are needing an SSRI and voluntarily taking it for some reason. Like, what's that about? That's, there's no incentive, right? Again, there's stigma, there's concern about side effects. So what's going on? It must be helping in some way. I go over kind of these statistics, and then I ask everyone to kind of up level how they think about mental health and brain health. And this is an audience that knows a lot about this, but a lot of people still think about psychiatry, if they think about it all, as, Prozac, serotonin, that's it. And then there's a lot of momentum right now around kind of anti-psychiatry, like bashing on serotonin, bashing on SSRIs, doubting their efficacy fully, exaggerating how often they cause severe withdrawal symptoms, just 3% of patients, right? And so this bothered me because that's not how anybody in psychiatry thinks. We all use SSRIs still because in psychiatrists' hands, they're quite handy medications. But we think about GABA, we think about all these other neurotransmitters, and then we think about, as you mentioned, these kind of three lenses, and this very much comes from eat to beat depression and anxiety too. We're like, hey, we got to think about neuroplasticity and BDNF. It's not a perfect biomarker, but it's the coolest molecule in the brain for us all to know about and hope for more of. BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, is a molecule. We all code for it in our DNA. And certain things you do, the usual suspects of lifestyle medicine seem to improve expression of BDNF. And I call it miracle grow. Lots of people call it that. I think about it as the molecule for hope, right? It means that my brain grows and changes. Essentially, I stopped drinking like 3.5 years ago, and I was just, I'm here in Bermuda as a sort of a press thing with Men's Health. And so we just went to the Gosling's rum warehouse. You can't actually distill any spirits in Bermuda. And there's an eighth generation family rum. And so I'm saying there, I don't have anything to drink, but it's just sort of fascinating to think about how my brain was different. Just so different than a few years ago when I would have been in there and had all the drinks. And so neuroplasticity, right? This idea that we can give birth to new brain cells, neurogenesis, and our brain grows and repairs. And it's underneath this idea that, like, if Arpana and I decided, got a little twinkle in our eye, a little limerence, we're going to leave our families and move together to Japan. I bet over time we'd settle into a nice relationship. We'd learn Japanese for sure, right? Our brains would change and grow and evolve, right? And that's all neuroplasticity. So the next is inflammation, right? Just our body's alarm systems. Everybody's talking about inflammation all the time. Is certainly a huge part. I'm really curious your thoughts on my perspective on this and whether I'm kind of in the ballpark around the microbiome and inflammation. Going to be very involved, but inflammation being a way that we want to think. We want our body alarm systems tuned and appropriate. And a lot of people are struggling with inflammation and excess levels of inflammation, often because of excess weight and adiposity. We know visceral fat is kind of metabolically active. But then also because people do lots of things like don't get enough sleep, which is really bad for brain inflammation, still smoke, don't have a lot of social connections. Oddly, not oddly, but kind of interestingly, when we're more isolated, we have more inflammatory factors floating around. And then this last lens is the microbiome of just thinking, what happens when people forest bathe? Does it change their microbiome? What happens when people are more social? Oh, weird. People who have more friends, they have a more diverse microbiome. So these, and I think in some ways I felt there should be a fourth lens where the fourth piece is saying, hey, let's think it in modern psychological terms a little bit more about ourselves.
Mm.
That's probably in some ways the last kind of piece of the book in there, along with these biological systems, is like I wanted people to be more engaged with the process of the formation and evolution of the self.
I mean, I love it. You talked about these three tenets related to mental health, but really, if you think about it, everything's interconnected. You know, as physicians, people will talk about the brain separate from the gut. You know, you go to a cardiologist to talk about your heart, but everything is interconnected. You know, there's this bidirectional communication between the brain and the gut microbiome, and of course, that's also influenced by inflammation. A lot of people don't know this, but you know, 80% of inflammation or inflammatory processes actually happen in the gut. And,
Yeah.
you know,
I didn't know that. The gut's the largest part of our immune system. I learned that, I think I was writing Eat Complete, and I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But like, I wonder why I'm learning that now.
when people think about like mental health, like you mentioned SSRIs or taking medications. So if you think about it, serotonin, you know, over 95%, 90% of serotonin is actually produced in the gut microbiome. So you know, everything is interconnected, which kind of leads me to the next question. You talk about these nine tenants and you base these nine tenants on neuroplasticity, inflammation, and the gut microbiome. So, do you mind talking about some of these tenants? Like, for example, let's take food. Can you really
Mhm.
use food to improve your mood?
I think so. And I can say that more confidently. When I first started this work, my first book, The Happiness Diet, came out in 2011. There were some correlational studies. Everybody who's, knows a little science, those are like, it's almost the weakest form of data, right? When we see a correlation. And then there are some prospective studies. And now there are, 7, 8, 9 randomized controlled trials, right? The gold standard of medicine showing some very interesting things. Like if you have depression and you're in treatment and you're not all the way better, and this is about 30 to 40% of people with depression, we call it treatment resistant depression, which is a horrible name. I've never seen anybody resist a good treatment for depression. Right? People are like, give it to me. Right. So, but that's what we call it. And we find that if you put folks like this on a Mediterranean diet, the studies do this a number of different ways. The SMILES trial by Felice Jacka, published in 2017, was the first. And that did 7 nutritional counseling sessions for patients, many of whom were already in therapy and taking a medicine. The trial after that was a group intervention where they taught a Mediterranean style like cooking class. It was like this is like the best, like every other Tuesday night. Like my depression would get so much better. Like, what are you doing? It's like I'm going to saute broccoli rabe and sample olive oils with my depression Mediterranean diet group, of course. That would be great. And then the studies kind of keep coming out and they show the SMILES trial, 32.3% of patients went into full remission. The Amend trial, which was just 2 nutritional counseling sessions for depressed young men, where they kind of emphasized plants that the boys liked. The young men, I call them boys, it emphasized legumes because, the young bros, they need the gains, they need to get swole. And so they do that by eating protein, and a lot of men eat just a ton of meat, and they got talked to about hummus and lentils. Um, and then 36% of those men went into full remission. 100% had an improvement in move. 100% changed their diet. So again, this research is interesting because it also challenges that notion of like, oh, depressed young men, like they're not going to change what they eat. It's like, no, the new generation of men will definitely change what they eat. And I mean, the study showed that. My practice, I have lots of my cell phone is like filled with pictures from 20-year-old men that I treat who like send me pictures of their food when they make it for their girlfriend. And like, it's another andropause moment for me. I mean, it's great. So anyway, all this relates to BDNF, we think, because BDNF is probably a final common pathway. You look at how you look at how psychotherapy works. You look at how electroconvulsive shock therapy works. You look at how meditation works. Sort of final common pathway. People think of BDNF. There are some studies like eating a diet with more nuts protects you from severely low levels of BDNF. But again, as I said, it's not like a perfect biomarker. Some of the other things that influence it, that we kind of see happen in terms of neuroplasticity. Certainly, probably the most powerful is exercise, or I call it movement, the tenet of movement. I don't really need you to exercise or, lift weights. I think it's great if you do, and I'd certainly recommend that. Resistance training is super important, but I find a lot of people, especially people with depression and anxiety, often aren't moving. They're not moving in groups. They're not moving outside, and so whether it's walking, hiking, I really like seeing people start to get more movement in their life, more stretching, And again, the neuroplastic effects. I mean, the exercise researchers are like, I mean, it's like so clear. It's like a million ways it helps your brain.
Yeah, even the inflammation or the microbiome. I mean, diversity in fruits and vegetables will lead to less inflammation and improve your microbiome, not only just the neuroplasticity. But
Yeah.
it's really interesting to me because I'm hearing you talk, and we talk about the Mediterranean diet or the blue zones being really, really good. Um, Good diet. So do you get this question where people be like, oh, but I'm a vegetarian, or I'm a carnivore. I don't like to eat vegetables. Which diet should I follow? Do you get that question? What you
So when I sit with patients, I try to remember to do a good nutritional psychiatry evaluation, which should take, an initial one, like 5 minutes, usually in the first or second session is what I recommend to clinicians, where I ask people, first of all, I ask permission if I wanted to ask them a little bit about food and nutrition. Some people really don't think that's related to their mental health. And so right there, I kind of wait for the next session or session after that. I was like, that's a lot of opportunity. Um, but sometimes people are in if someone's in a manic state or they're really struggling with alcoholism, this is the time to be like, can we talk about your pesto recipe right now? That said, we know that for a lot of people in recovery, right, that cooking, shopping, it's just a great way to pass time. It's a great way to stay busy. It's a nice way of like real good dopamine. So, but back to your question, some of the other tenets in terms of what improves neuroplasticity and how they relate to sort of inflammation of microbiome, some of the other tenets I think are quite interesting are around like engagement. So if you have a hobby, right, your risk of depression goes down by 30%. And I think about like how hobbies work. Like I don't have any great data on BDNF increases. It's just like when you're learning and doing and producing, there's probably good evidence that BDNF is involved, right? Because you're building neural pathways, you're challenging yourself cognitively. Just it's like a good brain workout. So hobbies of any type, particularly hobbies where you use your hand, I'm a big fan of people playing instruments. Like if I could kind of along with the diet, and I think there's a question where the book come from. If I could like map it out, one of my patients was teasing me. She got a similar dog to mine. She's like, "Is this the Dr. Drew Ramsey jam?" And I'm like, "I get the snuggly dog." I'm like, "Yeah, kind of. It's like part of it. If I were gonna ideally design it, yeah." But there, so a lot of these tenets I think do relate to neuroplasticity. Exercise certainly does. Nutrition certainly does. Connection, which is about asking people to be
that? Yes, I noticed
intentional.
that. Yeah, even when you were talking about food, you were talking about cooking with somebody else. We
Yeah.
were talking about movement. I heard you say movement with your friends. So it was very interesting to me that there was this common theme of connectedness.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really big one for me personally. I grew up as an only child, and and so like connection, friendship, like interpersonal relationships. I've been married for 23 years. I mean, I'm a therapist. I mean, I like relationships and I like connection, and I think it's probably why I became a psychotherapist. Is to me it really felt like the place in medicine where you had this rare thing. You had an intensity of interpersonal connection and you had longitudinal care. And so, there aren't a lot of places in medicine anymore, that kind of old, like, kind of rural family doctor, like knows the whole family. And that doesn't really exist in modern medicine anymore for most people, sometimes, but not very much. And in psychiatry, it felt to me it still does. I have families I've worked with for 2 decades now. And so, yeah, so I
So
like this idea
what,
of being together.
what would you say to somebody who is not very social, who's not an extrovert, and they'd be like, "Well, it's hard for me to get out there." How
Well,
would
I think, yeah, I mean, so I'd want to hear about the introversion and like what that means for the person. I find that introverts often tell me that they love interactions with people. They just like it like one person or two people. And so for that kind of person, I'd want to get into the schedule, like who's your favorite person to have dinner with? And they say, oh, I don't like to have restaurants. Like, great. Could you go someplace that's like empty? Like other off hours or, go to some place that isn't very popular or, you guys want to cook a little meal together. There's a way that if you're an introvert and it's one on one, if you're not like a particularly social person, you don't get anything from other people. It's just like a curious state. I think sometimes people certainly are in that state when they're on the more depressed side, right? So that's like 18 to 20 million Americans right there, where if you're struggling with some element of depression, connection is hard. I work with a lot of people who have depression, and as I'm like, how like swipe right, like let's date, let's see what you can do. They're like, no, like I'm not a very good version of myself. Like when people can ask me like, what have you been up to? It's like, I've been crying, isolating, not eating very much, and trying to stay alive. Like, what have you been up to? And so, there's a way that how you help people socialize, and that, classic phrase we have in mental health, right? Meeting people where they are. So I think, when I work with introverts, I want to be prescriptive, but in a very specific and intentional way. So, if you're an introvert and you're struggling with depression and anxiety, like going out on a Friday night, it's kind of torture for a lot of people. So,
I mean, we've done studies where we've actually shown that social isolation and loneliness actually changes your brain with those emotional arousal regions, leading to more depression, anxiety, and actually even changes inflammation in the microbiome.
yeah, I mean that data, Arpana, where like isolation changes the microbiome. I mean, in some ways it makes sense. I guess you're like hugging fewer people and like not sharing crudité with anybody at the party, but it it's also just it feels like, I don't know, it feels to me like these signals. If we pay attention to the science, it's kind of very clear to us these days. And then we look at the data on what's happening to us. What is the modern world doing to our social structure? What's it doing to, how is this kind of polarized nation that we've suddenly come to inhabit? Like, none of us like that. It's not good for anybody. It's not really going to work for us very well. We've got to, what makes us special as the countries are kind of like working together. And so, it feels like very timely that we be thinking again about both the quantity of connections. And then in the book, I also talk about, there's an exercise in the book about mapping your connections. Because I realized when I was thinking about connections, a lot of my patients, it's like, you're like boyfriend or girlfriend or partner, and then like some friends, and then your family. And that's kind of it. And I realized there were a lot of people who maybe weren't such great friends, but I really liked staying in touch with them. There's a young psychiatrist I got to mentor who's like one of these like super brainiacs, Shauna Scola. And I don't know, I got to talk with him. He's living in Berlin now, but it's one of these guys who's just like, I don't know, I just want to talk to Sean like once every 6 months, once a year, just see what that big brain is doing. Like he's changing psychiatry, right? And so those kind of folks, like for me, mentors and mentees became really much more important. Especially some of the folks I menteed kind of got a little more mature, and just got to see some projects like Greg Scott Brown's book coming out and Jesse Gould's book coming out. Just sort of other psychiatrists who started to get their voice out there, build platforms, write books. That was something in my 40s that became really, in terms of my connections. Just I don't know. I'd never really experienced anything like that. Like no, almost like a child, like no sense of like jealousy or competition. Like I only like I only send just wonderful thoughts their way. I don't know. It's a very and thinking about institutions, that was another big part of I found for myself, just trying to understand what roles I wanted institutions to play in my life, ways that institutions kind of weren't serving me or were desiccated in terms of, they'd lived their life, um, and 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 then also understanding institutions that I wanted to help contribute to and help remain solid in the kind of so those are sorry, one kind of deep
It's
one
tough
connection there.
because we live in a very competitive, cutthroat, very individualistic society. If you think about it in the olden days, or even in some communities, people lived in joint families. Like there was the grandmother living in the same house, the aunts and
Hmm.
uncles. I mean, if I go back to India, it's a joint family. Like you have gazillion cousins running around, and
Yeah, it's interesting that we don't have that as much. I think a lot of people pine and hope for that. And then just the reality of how a lot of American society is structured. Some people have that. A lot of people don't. And then I think I probably experienced this moving to New York. And New York's one of those places that's just going to gobble you up and your mental health, and unless you kind of build your family. And you see this happen in New York, where people just build, especially people who kind of come from places that don't accept them. and they build these like incredible communities, like incredible folks that feel like family. And it's really true. A lot of people, those connections, are still kind of very close and with me. And so, um,
I also wanted to talk to you. I was struck by your chapter on sleep. Can you talk
mm,
more about sleep and mental health?
yeah, what struck you, Arpana?
Well, the whole thing about dreaming and
Yeah,
integrating
I love it. I'm like an old school psychiatrist. Man. It's like
integrating the
the
dream.
dreams are so. I mean, dreams are. So, it's just. It's like kind of magic that you listen to dreams when you listen, or when I have a couple of patients who will have dreams where I'm in the dream, and it's like so intense, so meta. It's like such a great, interesting therapeutic process. So, uh, dreams, I just think are an interesting metric of whether you're sleep cycling or not, because you kind of do 2 hour sleep cycles, and so you're shooting for about four of them. And as you kind of drift out of very deep sleep and kind of come out of a sleep cycle into the next sleep cycle, that's usually when you're going to have some REM activity and dream. So we all probably dream, but people often don't remember their dreams or don't honor or sit with their dreams in any way. But I think it's just kind of like a reasonable measure of sleep quality. That with just, do you feel rested? Because I often meet with patients who would like tell me, I sleep 7, I sleep 8, I sleep 10 hours, I don't feel rested. And that's a big sign to get screened for sleep apnea, especially if you're a person who your partner complains about snoring, or those little apneic events. Um, I think there's a lot of room for improvement. I kind of like to think about sleep hygiene a little like nutrition. Like we say, like eat more vegetables, eat more seafood, like good luck. And I feel like with sleep, it's like sleep 8 hours, have good sleep hygiene, put down the phone. And it's like both of it like this doesn't really get you very far because people don't put down the phone. And so
Can you talk about what do you mean by sleep hygiene? I don't think
yeah,
everybody.
so sleep hygiene. So I go into a lot more detail than I ever have before in this book, where I think about all of the factors that influence your sleep. It starts first thing you wake up. I'm going to wake up right here. The sun comes up right there. I'm going to open up this window because the right light doesn't come through the glass, the right wavelength. And there's this low lateral light. I think Andrew Huberman is sort of credited with it, where it just starts the clock. So it kind of gets the clock started in all of your cells because all of your cells have these clock genes. So, sleep hygiene starts with getting early morning light. Again, you're going to get something like walking with some friends out in the neighborhood, like, amen. Like, that's a perfect morning, right? Because you're moving your body, you're socializing, you're getting low lateral light. Sleep hygiene then includes things like paying attention if you're waking up. Are there things waking you up? Like, for me, it's like my Bernedoodle in my bed, which I can't. She's so sweet, I can't get her out of the bed. But that's a problem for my sleep hygiene. I can just see on my sleep tracker when the dog sleeps in my bed or when it doesn't. It's just like obvious. How's the air quality? Right, we're all now worried. Everybody watching, we all have a teaspoon of plastic in our brain. Which I was wondering, is that like going to make Elon's implants just like settle in a little better? Like there's a little like plastic in there already. I mean, I was hopeful a little bit that maybe that was the answer, but I don't think that's the answer. So, uh, it's just it's uh, uh, yeah, the microplastics in the brain is a little concerning upon us.
Yeah, I mean that could also be related to our diet, but I really also loved how you talk about being grounded. And I think people need to hear that because
The
especially
grounding is nature. I forgot the microplastics was because I thought you should get a HEPA filter in your room. You should only get natural fibers. There's a lot of plastics and kind of various, of all the strange fibers we now have in our house. You should get rid of any scented candles or any candles at all in your home. That is really one of the worst things you can do for your sleep, for your inflammation, and for your brain health is burn candles inside. Get rid of them. You should, if there's going to be a scent in your bedroom, there's some data on linalool, which is the active ingredient in pesto. So, besides that, it's also the active ingredient in lavender. And there's actually data that lavender aromatherapy increases linalool levels in your blood and improves sleep. So linalool is very interesting, and lavender aromatherapy is maybe something you could try. But just the idea of really nice scents, really clean air, really nice fibers, really dark. Like one of my patients just got blackout curtains. Definitely high fived her after that because just like any light will disturb you. And again, so that's what and then there's the whole winding down. Number one is people don't turn their lights down. Like a great investment is dimmer switches or lights that you can dim. And everyone talks about like, oh, any light, prevents any melatonin. It's like, okay, bright lights are worse. So let's move on to grounding. Sorry, that was my loose association to microplastics. Um,
Yeah, being grounded. I mean, what that means, what it entails, and how is that related to mental health?
This is the joy of Columbia Psychiatry letting a farm boy come and train there years ago. Is that it's like I grew up in the dirt, Arpana. I mean, I grew up in like really rural Indiana. My parents were like hippies who had no idea what they were doing and moved out there. And so we grew a lot. We had big gardens. We were always experimenting, trying to grow more food. And I grew up in the middle of nowhere on 120 acres in Forest County in Indiana. And so uh, it never felt like poor because we had so much nature. And it just, I don't know, there's these two boys. I'm still buddies with them, Ian and Josiah, and we'd like run all around like our woods. We'd swim in the pond like all day long in the summer. And we were just surrounded by nature. And in the book, I read about it's related to sleep into nature. It's probably my favorite part in the book. I read about the night song. And when you go to our farm, we have this big pond, and all the tree frogs and bullfrogs and everything starts, chirping, and it becomes deafening. And it has this like, roar, roar, roar. If you've ever been to the country, everybody listens, been to the country, it has this like pulsating. I don't know. And you fall asleep to this, and as a psychiatrist, like, what is this noise doing to my brain? It's doing interesting things, and it just so I spend a lot of time in nature. If you follow me on Instagram, not as much as I would like these days, but it's just getting out into the forest. I wrote some about some of the science behind Shirin-yoku, the Japanese forest bathing, but there's also a meta-analysis on forest bathing as an intervention for depression, showing good results. 5 of the trials were people actually going into the forest. 2 of the trials were virtual reality headsets. And so just getting into nature, I just think is a really, it's just really wonderful. It doesn't always feel great. I have a lot of patients that, especially when they're struggling, they get out and it can feel very lonely, very isolated. That happens to me sometimes too. I get a little scared. I'll get like, especially at dusk. I'll get out into I've been trying to do more adventures right at dusk, like on my cross country skis. And you get out in like a storm and it's like night's falling and you're like a mile away from civilization. And it's really intense feeling. Anyway, I think nature's great for you, everybody, and I think that it's all around you. Even if you're in an urban area, you have parks, you can have house plants, you can grow herbs in your house. And for me, the part that I always come back to is this just profound miracle of life that I see in all these things. Whether it's the photosynthesis in the plants, or whether it's little creatures and insects flying around, or whether it's in my fellow human creatures. So nature, I think, has abundant opportunity for us.
And I mean, I love that tip where you, even in the book, you talk about it, where the guy doesn't like nature and
Was
all of a sudden becomes attached to Lily, the plant.
Yeah, as a television, I have wonderful. The book is dedicated to my patients because I've really been blessed in my career. I've just really just wonderful conversations. There's a gentleman who I was really, I was hounding to go camping. He's like not a camping guy, but he got a plant and he just he like liked the plant. It was just very sweet, seeing somebody heal from depression and get attached to things. And it's funny, I get very attached to plants. I mean, there's a little bit of me in that patient story. I have, I don't know, when we moved at one point, I realized we'd moved and, we'd only been in our house like 6 months. I had like 25 house plants already. And we like go to the garage. Just always, I like growing stuff a lot. It's been, for me, I think that's the other reason that the grounding chapter is very meaningful is just, I find a lot of healing in the plants and the animals. I find a lot of just very wonderful emotional space for myself. And it's generally my sense for patients as well. And so I hope for the readers, I think most people have that feeling of nature and like a lot of things, kind of like working on the self. People have kind of lost sight of it and they haven't realized it. doom scrolling's too fun. And same thing with nature. A lot of people used to like go on a camping trip once a year or go to a national park and, support our amazing, gorgeous national parks. Or, plan and train to go climb something. And, a lot of people still do that, but I think a lot of people have lost that.
It tied to that, you mentioned purpose. And I think I love the way that you wrote about it because it's not like a task. It's fluid and there's no judgment and you get there on your own time and in your own way and it's different for everybody. So I was wondering if you could talk maybe a minute because I think Vicky's on, but
Yeah. Hi, Vicky.
Hi.
This is this last tenet of purpose.
yes, the purpose.
Yeah, so well, Arpana, thank you. It's a book, and so it feels sometimes grandiose in a chapter to ask people to find their purpose. I ask people to think about purpose a little differently, and that purpose I find for people really doesn't revolve around passion. And I find that, as I say in the book, to be really bad advice, particularly for young people. Go follow your passion. As Professor Galloway says, that's usually someone who's very wealthy saying that, or somebody who hasn't maybe experienced finding satisfaction. I talk about process, that finding processes that you like, that you enjoy, that people respond to, that means something. You should pay attention to that. And encourage people to seek out things that serve themselves and serve others, and to realize that purpose kind of evolves. The purpose of a 20 and a 30-year-old, a lot of times they feel this very kind of older adult pressure to know what their life is going to be all about. And I found that's really not how it works. And so, and then there's a lot of having a sense of purpose. I would recommend everybody just volunteer a little bit. Is a great way to find that. It's really good for your mental health. And I found that to be very true. And sort of not the best winter 2 winters ago. And if I could get back to, it's funny, I'd always feel good when I saw patients, like always. It was like whatever I was feeling just dissipate. And I just really paid attention to that. And not in a like, oh, you're in a bad spot, Ramsey. I like his work, but more of like, what is it about this? Like, and it felt very purposeful, very intentional to me, and very kind of helpful in getting through a hard time. So,
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt this fascinating discussion. Really, it was just, you gave us so many things to unpack and incorporate into our lives, the nature. I have to say, because I'm a dog lover and you mentioned your Bernedoodle, I have a golden doodle sitting right next to me.
oh, the doodles are the best,
They
right?
are
It's
the
like,
best. Yes,
oh,
they are. Yes, they are. But really so many great things to consider as we live our lives. We have a lot of questions, but I'm wondering, Drew, if you could just summarize the talking points, the takeaways, tenets.
okay. Well, yeah. Why don't we just, yeah, thank you. And everyone, thank you so much for your time and your attention and your support of the Semel Institute. Without institutes like this, folks like me, we don't get wonderful audiences like you all on a Wednesday night to talk about mental fitness. And so thank you all. Let's just walk through the tenets. And I'm looking for my notes to make sure I don't think I can whip them out here just by here we go. All right. Well, tenet number one is self-awareness. And my big tip on self-awareness is journaling. I've really gotten into journaling. There's interesting data even that affect labeling, like writing down how we feel, um, and journaling, self-reflective journaling improves the activity of our frontal lobe, so the part of our brain that's involved in like decision making and executive function. Which when we're feeling brain fog, it's kind of, I don't know. I felt the journaling is really helpful and kind of almost like distilling down the noise. So I really recommend, again, a lot of these tenants are kind of, there's like low cost stuff that requires some intention and activity and discipline. Uh, we talked about nutrition, the second tenet, and lentils, pesto, excuse me, and your tinned fish game, I think is an important thing to work on. Anchovies, pasta con sardi, and like a great anchovy sauce would be things I'd recommend. We talked about movement. I think my take on with movement is, go dancing. That was probably, but think about movement broadly. If you're turned on by the whole weightlifting, live forever, build big muscles movement, get in there, start lifting. If you're not, start moving in any way. You can do anything. It's really, I encourage that. We talk about sleep next, and sleep, and we talked about sleep hygiene. Particularly, we talked a lot about improving your bedroom. I also find it for me, it's a little, I've never been the cleanest, neatest person. I've gotten that way in my 40s. But there's something about having the bedroom kind of organized and just kind of visually clear that I feel like my wife and I have gotten to a really good spot about. There's just very calming place to rest. Um, After sleep, the next tenant, I'll make sure I'm not going to miss one here. The next tenant is, I think, engagement. Um, the next is engagement. I'm right. And engagement is about, I'm sorry, the next is connection. And connection we talked about with the idea of thinking quantity and quality, right? Of like who, and I kind of mapped this out for myself, both during a period of my life where I really realized like I hadn't gotten new mentors since I'd finished all my training, and they don't just show up in your life. You have to be really active. Same time, I started getting some mentees, interestingly enough. But thinking about your connections, thinking about engagement. Engagement is my request and kind of noting that part of the modern world is about pulling our distraction and is about creating us, sort of pushing us to be more passive observers for the algorithms deciding what interests you. And engagement is asking you to decide what is of interest to you. We talk a lot about hobbies in there and talk about sort of building cognitive reserve. The next tenet's grounding, and I'd like you to get out into some nature. And again, it doesn't have to be big nature. You don't have to climb a mountain and go to a national park. I think that's awesome. But I think for a lot of people, it's being intentional. It's I think the ornithologists have a little like go listen to the birds. It's like listen to all the birds. I love it where it just kind of pulls you in mindfully. After grounding is the tenet of unburdening, and this is because I'm a psychotherapist, and it's actually we're celebrating a tenet a week leading up to book launch, and it's the tenet of unburdening. And unburdening is really just recognizing that so much of life involves trauma, and that we often define trauma kind of like we define mental health work as like it has to be this horrible violent trauma or robbery, and all kinds of different traumas out there. If you were mismatched with a parent, temperament wise, you had someone who just didn't see your needs. I've had people who've had horrible traumas. They just had a bad boss. But man, a bad boss is like, I mean, that can really like derail your mental health and career. And so unburdening is really is honoring that trauma is complex and asking people to think about if it's in some other way when it comes to building mental fitness. Um, and then the last is purpose, which we talked a little bit about, which is trying to live an intentional life, of trying, beginning with self-awareness, kind of bringing it full back to use that self-awareness to understand that there are a set of values you have, and they're a little different than mine. They might be a lot different than mine, and living a life according to those values, pursuing them, understanding them more, getting more deeply into them, sharing them with other people. That's very fulfilling stuff for humans in general. And so those are the 9 tenets of building mental fitness. I think there's some threads throughout the tenets. Some people ask like, where's spirituality and creativity? Sometimes I wake up at night and wonder where those are myself. But I think those are throughout all of these processes. I don't think you can get really involved in nutrition without kind of tapping into your creativity. I mean, I'm a middle-aged, moderately creative guy. I take pictures of so much food and you know style so many plates. I mean, you can really put creativity. Think about how put creativity in your movement. I mean, there's so many fun ways. It's one of the reasons I snowboard and I'm on the mountain a lot. Is it's a great leg workout and all that stuff, but it really just puts my mind in this very spontaneous, creative, playful space. So those are the 9 tenets to build mental fitness, and I hope they resonate with you. I hope they don't overwhelm. As uh, Arpana noted, kind of stacking them naturally is something that often happens, where you can see in a certain activity, like, oh, I had a little potluck with friends. I was like building community and connection. I was eating the good brain food. So there's a way that you you'll see these in a lot of your activities naturally, I hope.
Thank you, Drew. Such wise advice. And, I like the idea of the stacking because they do all go together. It's like a
Hmm.
nice balanced plate.
I think so. I'm in this very meaningful trip here where I'm with, as I said, Rich Dorment and Kerry Gaines. They're two men that I look up to incredibly. They're just consummate professionals. They're incredible men. They're so creative. I mean, Rich like runs all of Men's Health, all of Women's Health, and and so something for me very much just in this weekend about kind of really trying to be much more engaged. It's like really careful about making sure I was really prepared for this trip, really paying attention to myself in the conversations. Actually, did a little prep beforehand of what I wanted to hear, kind of understand more about each of these friends of mine, men that I know. Um, really a sense of purpose. It's like one of them truly says, I'm here with this guy, gentleman, Keir Gaines, who's a therapist, but probably one of the more influential therapists online. And so, just this notion of trying to use the tenants for myself in a setting like this to, again, kind of get more of a sense of purpose and kind of reinvigorate that. But yeah, it's an absolute treat, and to get to talk about the book with you, and I hope people will check it out. I got to record the audiobook, so that which I this is a little gratuitous, but I feel it's a little bit of a different piece of art, to be honest. There's a way that the reading of it was just a very emotional process of there's a way when you're reading it, you get to kind of interpret some of these things which are very nuanced and somewhat controversial, right, about meds and all that. But when I'm reading it, it's like I don't know, there's this pressure to really say it just right in terms of how I intended it. So for audio folks, I hope you enjoy that. Other questions? Sorry, I'm like rambling on here. I know we have
Well,
lots of people listening.
we have some other questions, but
Okay.
we are out of time, but if you are game, we can go to a few and go slightly over.
I'm game. Let's do like a rapid round, everybody. You all asked your questions, and you're always welcome to DM me your questions on Instagram, and I will answer them on Instagram and tag the Semel Institute. So
Right. And
let's.
you
I love
are really
questions.
good about that because that's how we met, because I DM'd you on Instagram.
I'm on Instagram.
Answered.
I like the Instagram.
Yeah. So, okay, what can we learn from the blue zones in terms of mental health?
Well, I think the blue zones support a lot of the tenants. I mean, I think the ones that we all love about the blue zones is that people tend to be more social, right? They tend to eat a simpler diet. I love the beaned data. Beans and legumes are just a wonderful part of the blue zones diet. I really think the connection one is what so many of us are missing compared with the blue zones, and also probably a sense of purpose, of just a little bit more. The blue zones tend to have cultures that are a little bit more kind of intact and filled with healthier activities. We've kind of struggled with that recently in a modern American culture of there's just not a lot we do where we get together that isn't about like drinking and sports. I guess church, but that's certainly kind of declining in activity in a lot of places. Um, so those are some of the things that I take from the blue zones. I think a lot of people take the plant forward diet from the blue zones as well, and I think that's a reasonable conclusion to make there.
Plant forward
Arpana,
diet. Yes, but even the plant forward diets, if you look at the blue zones, people are usually eating in a community. So there is that social connectedness,
Hmm.
there is that purpose, there is that movement that people are walking and strolling
Right.
evenings after a meal.
I
So
always think when I think of Mediterranean diet, I always think they're dancing after dinner, like, oh.
which happens, I mean, so a lot of people think it's just the food, but I think
Right.
it's what you talked about. It's the other aspects. They kind of all come together.
It
All
is, and it's an interesting part of our culture, right? Where we try to kind of extract the diet. Like, well, what is it? Is it your lentils? Is it the garbanzo beans? Is it the sardines? And I think, Arpana is exactly right. It's the lifestyle. And I think that a lot of people in the Mediterranean diet research world are like, they a little frustrated where it's not just eating the Mediterranean diet. That's it. There's these other, they take naps or, I saw there's a great post. I don't know who to attribute it to, but a woman wrote about the Greek Orthodox Church And that part of the Mediterranean diet for those individuals is they were fasting like up to 2 months out of the year. They'd have these like some like incredibly extended periods of fasting that, just certainly affects outcome and affects the data.
What about the keto diet? We have a couple of questions here about the keto
Yeah,
diet.
so the reason the keto diet's kind of back in the news, the keto diet never really goes away. So keto diets have been used since the early 1900s to treat pediatric epilepsy. Keto diets where you eat fewer than 50 to 60 grams of carbohydrates. Your brain needs more energy than that, and so it breaks down fats into three carbon bodies, beta hydroxybutyrate, which are ketones, and it's that fruity smell that people get after they've been drinking, but also if people have been fasting, they get a little fruitiness. Those are ketones. So ketogenic diets have been investigated for bipolar disorder, or kind of used clinically more than investigated. There have been some case reports going back about 10 or 15 years with the idea that a ketogenic diet is going to be somewhat mood stabilizing, just like we use a lot of anti-seizure medications to treat bipolar disorder. So the most recent trial on this, the best one, just came out about a year ago. Shabani Sethi she's heads up the division of metabolic psychiatry at Stanford and is funded by the Bazooki Foundation, is funding a lot of ketogenic diet research. If you're interested in this, follow the Metabolic Minds YouTube channel, which is their YouTube channel. Um, that study did a couple of things. One, individuals got a lot of coaching and help with the keto diet. In going into the trial, I think it was like 36% of the patients were in remission or in recovery, right? At the end of the trial, 81% were. There was a 36% loss of visceral adipose tissue. The metrics were quite impressive. There was a little bump in inflammatory markers from the patients, but the overall idea was people lost a lot of weight. They got sort of out of danger with metabolic syndrome and prediabetes. And so it was a very impressive trial. So it was a pilot trial, but that's kind of where the keto diet researchers, and then Chris Palmer at Harvard has this book Brain Energy, which is kind of asking people to think more about their mitochondria. And I think that's still probably a little TBD on how much of that is supported.
Jane Shao in our
Oh,
center, the director of our center, has done ketogenic diet research with epilepsy. But
Yeah.
again, it, it, I really don't advocate for following any diet. It's in fashion this year and it's out of fashion next year. And
Yeah. And I
it
think it's
really
important to note that
depends on person, yeah.
a traditional keto diet often,
Mhm.
I appreciate in Shabani Sethi's trials, people didn't have massive increases in LDL. They had some, but, people can have challenges with these extreme diets. I think, and again, there's a difference between, hey, someone has severe bipolar disorder and they're resistant to medicines, and a ketogenic diet is something that helps them. That's amazing. That's different than the rest of us going on a ketogenic diet. And so I don't mean the rest of us, I mean people without that diagnosis. And um, so I think keto is going to evolve. There are 6 trials the Buzuki Foundation funded, including a University of Ohio trial on depression, which I think will be the first ever keto trial on depression. Ian Campbell, Chris Palmer, and Shabani Sethi. I think if you're interested in this world are the 3 kind of names to be tuned into. And then in the book, I write about the ketogenic diet, and I interviewed Felice Jacka, who's the leader in nutritional psychiatry, and I really liked her comments. And there's some quotes in the book from her because I think she says the science is evolving, but right now it's not really what the science supports.
Yeah, and I think the key again, and you touch on this in the book, is diversity. So getting in as many fruits and vegetables as you can. I always say 30. 30 is the magic
No,
number.
I love that. I tracked that back to Tim Spector, our microbiome, but I'm not sure it's his, but his tip or not. But yeah, I love that 30 different
Mhm.
plants a week. I think that's really wonderful. And I think
a week,
actually,
30 a week?
if
30, 30,
30,
30 a week. So in our
yeah,
Netflix documentary, we talk about this, and I termed it as ABCs, always be counting,
I
not
love it. I love that.
not calories, but always be counting 30 fruits and vegetables per week. And
Yeah.
it's easy to do.
And I
doesn't
think
feel
also for a diverse, when you're a kind of diverse eater, evolved eater, I say, it's not that hard to do. I mean, there's just a lot of plants all around us. We really, kind of like with mental health, we live in an era unlike any other era. Like there's just, it's the best time ever to be struggling with your mental health. I know it's a weird thing to say. It's just like we know more. I feel like the same thing with food, whereas eat, like a couple of my cookbooks, like Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. I wrote that when I was living in rural Indiana. Like all of the food for the test recipes came from Walmart, just because like it kind of had to. I was like, if you can't buy it at Walmart, I don't want to put it in my book because majority of the population shops at a big box store, and it just seems more practical.
Well, unfortunately, we really are out of time now. We're actually over time, but I want to thank you for all your valuable insights, both Drew and Arpana. This was just an incredibly valuable discussion, and I can't wait to eat 30 fruits and vegetables this week. And all these wise tips with sleep. And so thank you. Thank you so much. And we are really honored to be the first ones to highlight your book,
Well,
um,
thank you.
which just launched. Am I correct? It just
It's
launched?
it's actually it's coming out on Tuesday, everybody.
Oh,
So that's why I'm a
okay.
little
So
bit. If
everybody
Yeah,
order the book.
that's why I'm basically like I'll do kind of anything for a pre-order now. DM me, propose it. If you want to order like 4 or 5, I mean I'll come over for dinner. I mean I'm at the end here right before launch. So anything you want. But everyone, I hope you'll check out the book, and I hope you'll continue supporting the Semmel Institute, most importantly. And Wendy, Vicky, thank you. It's an honor to speak with you all. I look forward. Let's see if I can squeeze another book out in the future, and you'll certainly be a first stop. And everyone, thank you so much for your time and attention tonight and all these great questions. As I said, feel free to DM me any questions on Instagram. I'm happy to tell you my thoughts about it. And I really look forward to signing some books here for some of you in the future. I'll be in LA for the American Psychiatric Association in May, and so try and do some sort of
Great.
signing while I'm out there. But yeah, everybody, thanks so much. Just a real honor to get to speak with you about mental health, and most importantly, I hope one of these ideas sticks. That's the most important thing, more than a pre-order. Is that something that we said tonight caught your interest and helps you in your journey to build your mental fitness?
Thank you. And thank you everyone for the privilege of your time and for tuning in today. And we'll look forward to seeing you. Our next open mind is on April 8th on social anxiety. So look forward to seeing everybody then. And thank you. Stay safe, stay well, be kind, and have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.